12 years of marriage dissolved not with a scream, but with the scent of bergamot and sandalwood clinging to a scarf that wasn't mine. Olivia had always worn citrus perfumes, bright, sharp, like lemon zest. This musk was darker, foreign. I noticed it first as she leaned over to kiss me goodbye, her blouse collar brushing my cheek. She lingered half a second too long, her breath catching, as if her body had already begun rehearsing guilt. We lived in a Georgian colonial on the outskirts of Chicago, its white pillars framing a life that looked perfect from the outside. 2 children, Sophie, 9, with her mother's unruly curls, and Liam, 6, a quiet boy who built elaborate Lego towers, slept upstairs. Olivia managed a contemporary art gallery downtown, her days filled with champagne openings and sculptors who mistook pretension for profundity. I was a forensic accountant, a hunter of hidden numbers, a man trained to see patterns in chaos. Yet I missed the most obvious pattern of all, my wife falling out of love. The signs were small, deniable. A password changed on her iPad, the old one, Sophie 2012, suddenly rejected. A new habit of taking her phone into the shower, though she'd never been one for podcasts. Then came the Thursday she came home at midnight, her cheeks flushed, claiming her car had broken down outside the city. She'd taken an Uber, she said, but there was no charge on our account. When I checked the mileage on her sedan the next morning, the odometer hadn't budged. I began documenting inconsistencies with the same focus I applied to corporate ledgers. Credit card statements revealed dinners at Le Claret, a restaurant she'd once mocked as overpriced theater, hotel charges in Milwaukee during a weekend she'd supposedly spent with her sister, in $3,800 purchase at Valliere & Sons, a boutique in Paris, a city her favorite sculptor Ethan Cole had visited the same week for an art fair. I cross-referenced dates, traced flight itineraries, mapped overlaps. My hands never shook. This was just another case. The key was the mistake. She'd hidden it in her jewelry box, tucked beneath a tangle of silver chains, a platinum keycard for the Laurent, a hotel 3 blocks from her gallery. I'd been there myself years ago for a client's retirement dinner. Its rooftop bar overlooked the river, all glass and arrogance. That night, after the children were asleep, I drove downtown, my hands steady on the wheel. The night concierge recognized me, or pretended to. Wealthy men all blur together. I swiped the key in the elevator, my reflection fractured in its mirrored walls. Room 1403. The door opened to a suite frozen in time, rumpled silk sheets, half-empty champagne flutes, a man's leather jacket slung over the armchair. Ethan's jacket. I'd seen it in press photos, the same battered collar, the same pretentious stitching. For a moment I considered waiting. Let them walk in, let her see me sitting there silent. But rage is a clumsy weapon. Instead, I went to the security office. The Laurent's manager owed me a favor. I'd once untangled an embezzlement scheme that saved his job. The footage was easy to retrieve. There she was, my wife, laughing as Ethan whispered in her ear, his hand slipping to her waist. They stepped into the elevator, her head tilted back in a way I hadn't seen in years. The timestamp read 9:47 p.m., the exact night she'd claimed to be at a donor gala. I copied the files, my pulse methodical. That night I parked in the garage but didn't go inside. I watched the kitchen window from the car, the glow of the pendant light above the sink. Olivia moved through the room, pouring wine, her face smooth as a closed ledger. I wondered how many lies she'd rehearsed, how many alibis nested like Russian dolls. When she texted, "Working late again?" I didn't reply. By dawn, I'd made a plan. Not a divorce, not yet. Divorce is a blunt instrument, and Olivia deserved something sharper. She'd chosen to unravel us. I would unravel her. Slowly, delicately, the way you unpick a suture to watch the wound bleed. I started with the gallery. Her career was her religion, and Ethan Cole, its flawed messiah. His installations, twisted metal and neon slogans, were funded by grants she'd pushed through, bypassing the board. I combed through public records, tax filings, found irregularities in his non-profit status, small things. A misreported donation here, an overvalued sculpture there, enough to seed doubt. I leaked them anonymously to an art blog, watched the first headline bloom. Ethics or ego? Questions swirl around rising star. Olivia came home tense that night, her phone buzzing with notifications. She silenced it, poured a third glass of Malbec. "Rough day at work," she said, smiling the way people do when they're lying. I smiled back. The next morning I booked a flight to Paris. Paris in November smelled of wet cobblestones and roasted chestnuts, a city that wore its melancholy like perfume. I stood outside Vallières-en-Sons, its windows fogged with condensation, watching the jeweler polish a sapphire necklace behind the counter. The bell chimed as I entered, my reflection warped in the gilded mirrors. I presented Olivia's receipt, my voice steady, as I claimed to be her assistant. The jeweler hesitated, eyeing my lack of a French accent, but handed over the velvet box. Inside lay a locket, heart-shaped platinum, engraved with E+O in cursive. I slipped it into my pocket and replaced it with a replica, identical in every detail except for the inscription, "Fraud." Back in Chicago, I waited. Our anniversary arrived draped in frost, the kind of cold that seeps into bones. Olivia wore the emerald dress I'd bought her 5 years ago, its color duller under the dining room chandelier. She handed me the locket with trembling fingers, her smile brittle. "A fresh start," she said. I snapped it open, let the engraving catch the light, and watched her composure fracture. She didn't speak, didn't cry, just stared at the word as if it were a verdict. The next phase required patience. Ethan's financial web stretched wider than I'd imagined. Shell companies in Luxembourg, undeclared commissions from galleries in Dubai, a numbered account in Zurich. I compiled the evidence with clinical precision, each document a thread in the noose, but exposing him outright would have been too clean. Instead, I fed crumbs to rival artists, jealous curators, a tax auditor with a grudge. Let them believe they'd uncovered the truth themselves. Olivia's gallery began to bleed. Sponsors withdrew, citing ethical concerns. Critics who'd once praised Ethan's work now called it commercially cynical. I attended one of his exhibits, standing at the back as he ranted about artistic persecution to a dwindling crowd. His eyes met mine across the room, a flicker of recognition, but I vanished before he could speak. Paranoia is a slow poison. At home, Olivia became a ghost. She stopped wearing perfume, stopped texting excuses. Some nights, I'd find her sitting in Liam's room, watching him sleep, her face unreadable. She tried to bridge the silence once, placing her hand over mine as we sorted mail. I let it linger, then slid free to open an envelope from the IRS. The final piece came from an unexpected source, Sophie's school project. Her class had visited Olivia's gallery, and she'd drawn a picture of Mommy S' work, a stick figure woman standing beside a twisted metal sculpture. In the corner she'd written, "Mommy's friend, Mr. Ethan, helps her." I framed the drawing, hung it in my office. Olivia noticed it during a rare argument about summer custody arrangements. She didn't scream, didn't deny. Just whispered, "You'll punish all of us, won't you?" The answer was in the spreadsheets, the flight records, the replica locket hidden in my desk. Revenge isn't a single act, it's an ecosystem. I let Ethan's paranoia metastasize. He began accusing Olivia of sabotaging him, their texts growing frantic, desperate. She deleted them, but not before I'd mirrored her phone. On the night of their last meeting, I sent a courier to the Laurent. The package contained the original locket, its engraving restored to E+O, along with a note typed on gallery letterhead. "We're done. Don't contact me again." Let him think she'd abandoned him. Let her wonder how he'd gotten the key. By Christmas, Ethan's Instagram was a graveyard of deleted posts. Olivia's gallery closed its doors, citing restructuring. She took a job at a suburban art school, her hands still shaking when she reached for her wine glass. The children adapted, as children do, Sophie humming Taylor Swift in the back seat, Liam building taller, more precarious towers. I began running again, tracing the lakefront at dawn, my breath fogging the air. Sometimes I'd pass the Laurent, its windows glowing like a diorama of a life I no longer recognized. I never looked up. The final blow landed in February. An anonymous tip to the IRS triggered an audit of Ethan's offshore accounts. His assets froze, his sculptures seized as collateral. Last I heard, he'd moved to a rented studio in Detroit, painting murals for tech startups. Olivia filed for divorce the next week, her lawyer negotiating quietly without fight. She didn't ask for the house. The night she moved out, I found her standing in the foyer, her suitcase by the door. For a moment I thought she'd speak, confess, apologize, something. Instead, she touched Sophie's drawing on the wall, her finger tracing the jagged metal sculpture. Then she left, the click of her heels echoing like a stopped clock. I poured a bourbon, sat at the kitchen island, and opened my laptop. Numbers flickered across the screen. A new case, a new puzzle. Somewhere, a CEO was hiding millions in the Caymans. Somewhere, a marriage was crumbling. I sipped my drink, the ice cracking like tiny bones, and began to work. Revenge leaves no winners, only architects of ruin. By spring, the house felt cavernous, its rooms echoing with the absence of Olivia's heels on hardwood, the silence between phone calls, the hollow space where her perfume bottles once crowded the vanity. The divorce finalized quietly, a 10-page document that reduced 12 years to bullet points. She took nothing but her clothes and a single painting, an abstract tangle of red strokes she'd bought early in our marriage. "It's called unraveling," she'd said then, laughing. I hadn't understood the joke until now. The children asked no questions. Sophie folded her mother's absence into bedtime stories, inventing elaborate adventures where Olivia traveled the world, fixing art. Liam stopped building towers. Instead, he constructed mazes, intricate labyrinths that sprawled across his bedroom floor. "So no one gets lost," he explained. I didn't correct him. I sold the house to a young couple who praised its good bones. They didn't notice the hairline crack in the foyer mirror or the faint stain on the master bedroom ceiling where Olivia had once spilled wine. We moved to a high-rise downtown, floors above the noise, where the windows stretched from wall to wall and the lake looked like polished slate. Sophie claimed the room facing east. Liam insisted on the north, where he could count airplanes. Olivia's new life unfolded in fragments. A mutual friend mentioned she'd been seen at a gallery opening in Miami, her arm linked with a silver-haired collector. Ethan resurfaced in a viral video, drunkenly vandalizing his own mural in Detroit. I watched it once, then blocked his name. The past is a fire. Feed it and it consumes you. I focused on work. A pharmaceutical company hired me to trace $200 million funneled through offshore clinical trials. The numbers comforted me, their logic immutable. At night, I'd walk the lakefront, past joggers and homeless veterans until my legs ached. One evening, I found myself outside the Laurent. The doorman nodded as if I'd never left. Room 3 was occupied, but the manager, still indebted, offered me the security feed. I watched a man in a tailored suit pour champagne for a woman half his age. She laughed, tossing her hair in a gesture so familiar it clenched my throat. I deleted the footage. Some ghosts don't need exercising. The children adapted. Sophie joined the school choir, her voice clear and unafraid. Liam made a friend, a boy who wore dinosaur pajamas under his clothes. They built forts instead of mazes. I learned to pack lunches, to braid hair, to distinguish between a nightmare and a fever. We ate pancakes for dinner sometimes. The world didn't end. On the anniversary of the divorce, a package arrived. No return address. Inside lay the original locket, E+O, still etched into its surface. Olivia's handwriting filled the note. "You forgot this." I held it to the light, the platinum cold as a scalpel. That night, I dropped it into the lake from the Navy pier, watching the ripples dissolve into black. The seasons turned. Winter carved the city into ice. Then spring arrived with its false promises. I took the children to Olivia's new exhibit, a charity show at the art school where she taught. Her pieces were smaller now, muted watercolors of empty chairs. She stood across the room, her gaze skimming mine like a stone over water. Sophie squeezed my hand. "She looks sad," she whispered. I said nothing. Grief is not a contest. Driving home, Liam asked if we could get a dog. "A golden retriever," he said, "one that could fetch sticks and sleep on his bed." I agreed. The next weekend, we brought home a puppy with fur the color of wheat. Sophie named him Sandman. He chewed shoes, barked at mailmen, and left hair on everything. The children laughed more. Olivia's calls stopped. Her Instagram vanished. The art school mentioned a sabbatical. I didn't search for her. Let her disappear. Let her rebuild. Somewhere in the world, Ethan Cole still paints. Somewhere, a man buys his lover a platinum locket. The math is universal. I keep Sophie's drawing framed in my office, the stick figure woman and the twisted sculpture. Clients sometimes ask about it. "A reminder," I say. They nod, imagining sentimentality, not the quiet calculus of consequences. At night, when the city hums below and the children sleep, I stand at the window. The lake reflects nothing but its own darkness. I think of the locket sinking, of Olivia's empty chairs, of the way betrayal first smells like bergamot, then like nothing at all. The numbers still comfort me. 2 + 2 = 4. A family minus a wife equals a different family. Sandman paws at my leg, his tail thumping. I rub his ears, his warmth a small, steady truth. Downstairs, the elevator dings. A neighbor returns from work, heels clicking. Life continues, neither kind nor cruel, just persistent. I pour a bourbon, the ice cracking like distant applause. On my desk, the pharmaceutical case glows. A labyrinth of hidden decimals. I begin again. The numbers never lie.